The galaxy is old. This is the first truth that every young species must eventually accept.
In the heart of this ancient galaxy, there exists an order far older and more subtle.
A great wheel
For
of light
3,000
and
galactic
shadow,
cycles, the
carrying
conclave
within its
maintained
spiral
peace
arms
through
the weight of
precedent
10
that breaking the
million
rules.
years of civilized
And so,
history.
on the crystalline world of
Civilizations
Valor
have
Prime,
risen here,
in the
touched
great
the
hall of
stars,
whispers,
shaped
where the
reality
seven
to their will, and then crumbled into dust so fine that even their ruins have long since turned to sand. And through it all, the great wheel keeps turning, indifferent to the ambitions of those who ride upon its rim. In the heart of this ancient galaxy, where the stars burn thick as fireflies in a summer meadow, there exists an order. It is not an empire. Empires are crude constructions of the young. It is not a federation. Federations are messy compromises of the desperate. It is something far older and far more subtle. The conclave of 7 species. 7 races who learned, long before humans had learned to walk upright, that survival in the galaxy required something more than strength. It required patience. It required wisdom. And above all, it required the ability to recognize that the galaxy was vast enough for many dreams, provided those dreams did not trample upon the dreams of others. For 3,000 standard galactic cycles, roughly 6,000 Earth years, the conclave had maintained this fragile peace. Not through force of arms, though their combined military power could crack planets like eggs. Not through economic dominance, though their trade networks spanned from the burning core to the frozen halo. They maintained peace through something far more powerful: precedent. The simple, unspoken understanding that there were rules, and that breaking them meant stepping outside the warm circle of civilized space into the cold darkness where predators lurked. And so, on the crystalline world of Valor Prime, in the great hall of whispers where the 7 species gathered to guide the destiny of known space, the mood on this particular day was one of comfortable routine. The hall itself was a masterpiece of diplomatic architecture, designed not to impress, but to calm. Its walls were living crystal, grown over centuries into intricate patterns that caught the light from Vala's blue-white sun and scattered it into 1,000 gentle colors. The air was carefully blended to suit each species' respiratory needs. Warm and moist for the amphibian xylosians, thin and cool for the avian KRYLL, rich with trace elements for the silicon-based Dorith. The great circular table at the center was not a table at all, but a holographic projection surface, currently displaying the quiet flow of commerce between member worlds. Ambassador Thrax of the Krell hegemony shifted his massive frame in his specially reinforced chair. The Krell were the youngest of the 7, having joined the conclave only 800 cycles ago, and Thrax still found these gatherings tedious. He was built for action, not talk. 3 meters of muscle and chitin, with 4 arms that could bend steel and a jaw that could crush rock. His species had risen through conquest, and though they had learned to play the diplomatic game, they had never truly learned to love it. His golden compound eyes swept the chamber with barely concealed impatience. Item 37 on the agenda, droned the Xylosian moderator, her moist skin glistening under the crystal light. The matter of newly discovered sentient species, designation Galactic Registry, File 9472 Alpha. Common name proposed, humans. Homeworld, Sol, 3, an unremarkable yellow dwarf system in the outer verge. A ripple of mild interest passed through the chamber, quickly suppressed. New species were discovered with reasonable frequency, perhaps one every 50 cycles. Most were primitive, barely having mastered fire, let alone interstellar travel. They were noted, cataloged, and quietly observed from a distance until they either died out or developed enough to warrant contact. The Conclave's prime directive, established after a disastrous early contact that had triggered a species-wide religious war, was simple: do not interfere. Let them grow at their own pace. Let them make their own mistakes. The galaxy had time. The file indicates, the moderator continued, that this species has achieved faster than light travel through an unconventional method. They appear to have bypassed several standard developmental stages, utilizing a theoretical drive system that manipulates gravitational fields rather than folding space-time. Now there was genuine interest. Ambassador Lyss of the KRYLL tilted her feathered head, her large eyes blinking rapidly. The KRYLL were scientists and philosophers, the oldest of the seven, and deviations from expected developmental paths always caught their attention. Bypass standard stages. How is that possible? Gravitational manipulation is typically a Tier 3 technology, requiring centuries of refinement after FDL is achieved. These humans, they are Tier 1 surely, barely spacefaring. The moderator consulted her data stream. According to observation reports, the humans developed their gravity drive approximately 70 of their years ago. Prior to that, they had only just achieved orbit around their own world. They appear to have discovered the principles almost by accident during research into, I apologize, the translation is difficult, into what they call black holes and the nature of reality. They theorized the existence of gravitational waves, confirmed them, and within a single generation, learned to manipulate them. A soft murmur rippled through the chamber. The Xylosian trade minister, whose species had taken 3,000 years to progress from steam power to FTL, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The Dorith representative, a being of crystalline structure that communicated through light pulses, flickered in a pattern that translated roughly to astonishment. Thrax of the Krell leaned forward. And their military capacity? What defenses does this system possess? The question was typically Krell, direct, aggressive, and slightly out of place in a discussion about a newly discovered primitive species. But it was a valid question. The Conclave's security protocols required assessment of potential threats. The moderator paused, clearly struggling to frame the data diplomatically. The humans are fragmented. They have approximately 200 distinct political entities on their homeworld, loosely organized into what they call nations. These nations maintain standing military forces that have engaged in periodic conflicts throughout their recorded history. Their technology level, apart from the anomalous FTL drive, is consistent with early Tier 1. Kinetic weapons, explosive projectiles, primitive energy shields. They have demonstrated the capacity for planetary-scale destruction through nuclear fission, but have not deployed such weapons in conflict for approximately 80 years. 80 years. Thrax repeated, and his translator emitted something approximating a scoff. They haven't fought a real war in 80 years, and they call themselves a military species? My people have been fighting border skirmishes with the Vorith cluster for 300 cycles. That's real conflict. These humans are children playing with fire. With respect, Ambassador, the KRYL scientist interjected, 80 years of peace is not necessarily a sign of weakness. It could indicate maturation, a growing understanding of conflict's futility. Or it could indicate fear, Thrax countered. They developed planet killers and then lacked the courage to use them. They mastered gravity manipulation by accident and have no idea what to do with it. They are a species of accidents, of lucky breaks, without the discipline to build a coherent civilization from their good fortune. The moderator raised a webbed hand. The nature of human civilization is not the immediate concern. The concern is their violation of prime directive protocols. They have achieved FDL, but they have done so without developing the accompanying social and political structures that normally accompany such advancement. They are, to use the technical term, premature. The question before the conclave is, what action, if any, should be taken? The debate that followed was measured, thoughtful, and ultimately inconclusive. The KRYL advocated for continued observation, arguing that premature interference could trigger unpredictable consequences. The Xylosians, whose trade routes passed near human space, expressed mild concern about the disruption to commerce. The Dorith, as always, remained inscrutably neutral. The Krell, led by Thrax's increasingly forceful arguments, suggested that the humans needed to be managed before their chaotic expansion caused problems. But no decisions were made. That was the conclave way. Decisions required consensus, and consensus required time. The human matter was tabled for future discussion, filed away in the vast archives of galactic bureaucracy, and largely forgotten by all but the most diligent observers. All except Thrax. The Krell ambassador returned to his ship that evening, his compound eyes gleaming with thoughts that he carefully concealed from his diplomatic counterparts. The hegemony had been looking for an opportunity, a chance to prove its strength, to expand its influence, to remind the older species that the Krell were not merely members of the Conclave, but potential leaders of it. The humans, so primitive, so fragmented, so utterly unprepared for the realities of galactic power, presented exactly such an opportunity. He transmitted a private message to the Krell High Command, encoded in frequencies that no Conclave monitor could intercept. Its contents were simple. A primitive species has achieved FTL in the outer verge. They are disunited, militarily weak, and possess no allies. Their world is rich in resources we require. With a single, decisive action, we can humble them, secure their territory, and demonstrate to the Conclave that the Krell are not merely members of the galactic community, but its rightful guardians. The older species will tut and frown, but they will do nothing. They never do. The humans are ours for the taking. On Earth, of course, no one knew any of this. The people of Sol 3 went about their daily lives, oblivious to the fact that they had been discussed, dismissed, and ultimately targeted by powers they could barely imagine. In New York, commuters crowded onto subways. In Beijing, students filled classrooms. In Lagos, markets hummed with commerce. In London, couples walked hand in hand through evening parks. They watched their entertainment, argued about their politics, fell in love, raised children, grew old, and died, all beneath a sky that had suddenly become far more interesting than they knew. The Krell War fleet assembled in secret, in the dark spaces between stars where Conclave monitors rarely ventured. It was not the full might of the hegemony. That would have drawn attention. It was something more subtle, a punitive expedition, large enough to overwhelm any primitive system, small enough to be plausibly denied if things went wrong. 3 dreadnoughts, each the size of a small moon, their hulls scarred by centuries of real combat. 12 cruisers, fast and deadly, designed to hunt down fleeing ships. 20 frigates, screening vessels meant to intercept communications and prevent escape. It was, by Krell standards, a modest force. By human standards, it was an apocalypse given form. The fleet's commander, Admiral Vorith, was a veteran of the Vorith Cluster Wars, a warrior who had personally overseen the orbital bombardment of 3 rebellious colonies. He sat in his command chair on the bridge of the dreadnought's Sword of Victory, reviewing the intelligence on humanity with a mixture of contempt and mild curiosity. They had no unified military command. They had no experience with interstellar warfare. They had no ships capable of matching his dreadnoughts. The only potential threat was their FTL drive, which was faster than Krell technology, but that would only allow them to run. And running, in Admiral Vorith's experience, was the first step toward extinction. He gave the order, and the fleet translated into the gray nothing of FTL, aimed at the yellow star the humans called Sol. Behind them, in the Hall of Whispers on Vala Prime, the Conclave detected the movement. Their sensors were old and wise. They saw the Krell fleet depart, saw its trajectory, and understood its destination. An emergency session was convened, but it was a formality. The older species looked at each other with expressions that ranged from resignation to mild disgust. The Krell were impulsive, aggressive, and ambitious. They would have to be dealt with eventually. But for now, they were acting within their rights. The humans were not Conclave members, and the Krell had not technically violated any treaty by launching a preemptive action against a potential threat. Ambassador LYSS of the KRYLL voiced what many were thinking. "It is unfortunate," she said quietly, "but perhaps necessary. The humans are too primitive, too chaotic. A sharp lesson now might save them from far worse consequences later. The Krell will occupy their system, demand tribute, establish a governor. In a generation, the humans will have learned their place in the galactic order. It is harsh, but it is the way of things." And so the Conclave watched, with the detached interest of elders observing children at play, as the Krell War fleet approached the Sol system. On every continent, in every nation, humans stopped what they were doing and looked up. The Krell ships were visible now, even in daylight. 3 massive dreadnoughts hanging in the sky like new, terrible moons, surrounded by the smaller specks of cruisers and frigates. They blotted out stars. They cast shadows. They were, by any objective measure, the most terrifying thing humanity had ever seen. And in that moment, with the clock ticking down toward annihilation, humanity did something that no galactic species had ever done when faced with overwhelming force. They got angry. Not afraid. Not desperate. Not rational. Angry. A hot, burning, collective fury that crossed every boundary, every nation, every language, every ideology. Some unknown artist in Sydney projected a simple image onto the side of the opera house. A middle finger, rendered in blazing light, aimed at the sky. In Moscow, crowds gathered in Red Square, not to flee, but to chant. In New York, the stock exchange closed, and the brokers went home to hug their children and then report for military duty. In small villages across every continent, farmers took down hunting rifles that had hung over fireplaces for generations and looked up at the sky with eyes that had not changed since their ancestors faced down saber-toothed tigers with sharpened sticks. The Krell waited. The conclave watched. And on Earth, in the final minutes before the deadline, humanity began to move. It was not a coordinated response. There was no time for that. It was something far more terrifying. 1,000,000 individual responses, each driven by the same furious refusal to submit, converging into a single chaotic whole. Mining ships powered up their plasma cutters. Cargo haulers were stripped of their cargo and loaded with explosives. Retired military pilots, some of them old enough to remember the last great wars, climbed into atmospheric fighters that had never been designed for space combat and launched anyway, knowing they would never come back. The clock reached 0. Admiral Vorath, watching from the bridge of the Sword of Victory, saw no sign of surrender. He saw nothing but the blue-green planet turning slowly below, beautiful and fragile and utterly defiant. He sighed, a gesture his species used to express disappointment rather than regret, and gave the order. Commence bombardment. Target military installations only. We want the planet intact, but we want them to understand. The guns of the Krell fleet began to speak. And in that moment, the galaxy's long, comfortable nap came to an abrupt and violent end. For the first time in 10,000 years, the ancient Wheel of Stars was about to encounter something it had never faced before. The first shots of the Battle of Sol were not fired by warships. They were fired by a 63-year-old retired geologist named Hiroshi Tanaka, who had spent 40 years piloting mining drones in the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter. When the Krell ultimatum expired, Tanaka was aboard his privately owned prospecting vessel, the Rockhound's Pride, a battered 12-meter mining rig with more patches than original hull. He had heard the broadcast. He had watched the clock tick down. And in that final moment, with his ancient heart pounding against his ribs, he did something that no tactical simulation would ever have predicted. He rammed a Krell frigate. The frigate, designated Swift Claw, was positioned on the outer edge of the Krell formation, tasked with intercepting any human ships attempting to flee the system. Its commander, a young Krell officer named Track, was watching the main bombardment with professional satisfaction when his proximity alarm screamed. He had less than 3 seconds to register the threat, a tiny blip, moving at impossible speed, straight toward his ship's port engine nacelle. The Rockhound's Pride was not designed for combat. It had no weapons, no shields, no armor. What it had was a fusion drive powerful enough to push asteroids, a hull reinforced for impact with floating rock, and a pilot who had spent his entire life learning to navigate the chaotic gravitational fields of the belt. Tanaka didn't bother with evasive maneuvers. He didn't try to outgun the frigate. He simply pointed his ship at the largest target he could see and opened the throttle to maximum. The impact was catastrophic. The Swift Claw shields, designed to deflect energy weapons and kinetic projectiles, were not calibrated for a 12-meter fusion-powered battering ram traveling at a significant fraction of light speed. They flickered, overloaded, and failed. The Rockhound's pride punched through the engine nacelle like a bullet through paper, its fusion core detonating in a brilliant blue-white flash that tore the frigate in half. Track had exactly 1 moment to understand what had happened. A human ship, an unarmed civilian vessel, had just committed suicide to destroy his command. Then the vacuum took him. Across the Krell fleet, alarms began to scream. But it was already too late. The human response was not a coordinated attack. It was a swarm. From every orbital platform, every moon base, every asteroid colony, every hidden shipyard, they came. Not in formation, not with tactical discipline. They came like hornets from a kicked nest, angry, chaotic, and utterly indifferent to their own survival. The Krell Admiral Vorith stared at his tactical display in disbelief. His fleet, the pride of the hegemony, was designed to fight conventional battles. Enemy fleets formed lines. They exchanged fire according to established protocols. They withdrew when losses became unacceptable. These humans did none of these things. They didn't even seem to understand that they were supposed to die when their ships were hit. A Krell cruiser, the Iron Talon, reported multiple impacts on its port side. The source, 3 converted cargo haulers, each packed with mining explosives, had simply flown into it. Not fired from a distance, flown into it, like living missiles, their pilots accepting death as casually as breathing. The cruiser's shields held for the first 2. The third got through. The Iron Talon listed badly, its internal atmosphere venting from a hull breach the size of a small building. "Admiral," his tactical officer shouted, her voice cracking with something Vorith had never heard from a Krell officer before: fear. "They're everywhere. They're not following any pattern I can recognize. They're just coming." Vorith gripped the arms of his command chair, his chitinous hide prickling with a sensation he refused to identify as dread. "Calm yourself. They are civilians in converted civilian vessels. They cannot harm us seriously. Focus on the military targets." The deck lurched beneath him. The Sword of Victory, his flagship, the most powerful vessel in the Krell fleet, had just been hit. The weapon that struck it was not a weapon at all, by any civilized definition. It was a mass driver, a magnetic catapult used by human asteroid miners to launch or toward processing stations. But someone, somewhere in the chaos of humanity's response, had realized that a mass driver could launch more than ore. A mining station on Deimos, one of Mars's tiny moons, had spent the hour of the Krell ultimatum frantically loading its mass driver with every piece of scrap metal it could find. Bolts, beams, old machinery, broken satellites, anything dense enough to cause damage. When the Krell fleet moved into position, the Deimos station aimed its driver at the largest target and fired. The projectile was not guided. It was not armed with explosives. It was simply a 2-ton chunk of Martian steel, accelerated to a velocity that made a mockery of Krell shield technology. Shields, Vorith knew, were designed to deflect energy and slow projectiles. They were not designed to stop something moving fast enough to ignore them entirely. The steel punched through the Sword of Victory's forward shields, through its armored hull, and through 3 internal decks before finally coming to rest in the main engineering section. The flagship was not destroyed, but it was wounded, and more importantly, it was distracted. Outside, the battle degenerated into something the Krell had no word for, because their language had never needed to describe such chaos. Human ships swarmed around Krell vessels like angry insects, too fast, too unpredictable, too insane. A Krell frigate would turn to engage one threat, only to be struck by 3 more from angles that made no tactical sense. Human pilots flew through debris fields that should have shredded their ships, using the wreckage as cover. They flew so close to Krell hulls that their drives left scorch marks on the armor. They fired weapons that weren't supposed to work in vacuum, old-fashioned projectile guns, their rounds tumbling end over end, because the humans had learned to fight in atmosphere and simply refused to adapt to space. And then there were the transmissions. The Krell fleet's communication officers were overwhelmed by a flood of human broadcasts, pouring in on every frequency. Not military commands, not surrender requests, not even threats. Just noise. Music, screaming, laughter, battle hymns from wars centuries old, children's songs, political speeches, love poems, religious chants. It was as if humanity had decided that if they were going to die, they would take the Krell with them into a madness of sound. Vortha's tactical officer held up her translation device, her face a mask of horror. "Admiral, one of the transmissions, it's repeating. I think it's directed at us." "Play it." The voice that emerged was human, female, young. It was singing, her words translated roughly by the device. "And the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there." "What does it mean?" Vorth demanded. His officer shook her head slowly. "I don't know, Admiral. I think it's their battle anthem. But it's ancient, centuries old. They're singing a song from before they had spaceflight, from before they had electricity. They're singing about watching their enemies attack and surviving anyway." On the view screen, a human ship, little more than a cockpit with engines strapped to it, flew directly into the bridge of a Krell cruiser. The explosion was beautiful and terrible, a flower of fire blooming against the stars. Vorth made a decision. It was not a tactical decision. It was the decision of a predator who had just realized that the prey he had chosen was not prey at all, but something far more dangerous. "All ships," he commanded, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "Break off. Retreat to the edge of the system. Regroup and assess damage." "But Admiral," his tactical officer began. "That is an order." The Krell fleet turned, or tried to turn. But the humans did not let them go easily. They pursued, harassing the retreating ships all the way to the orbit of Neptune, firing until their weapons ran dry, until their ships ran out of fuel, until they simply couldn't follow any further. A Krell destroyer, the Stormfang, lost all power to its engines and was left drifting, its crew listening in helpless terror to the human transmissions that still flooded their receivers. When rescue ships finally reached it 3 days later, they found the crew alive but broken, staring at nothing, their minds shattered by the constant barrage of human noise and the certain knowledge that at any moment, another suicide ship might appear to finish what it started. The survivors of the Krell fleet limped back to the edge of the Sol system and beyond, regrouping in the dark between stars. The Sword of Victory listed badly, its internal systems flickering, its admiral staring at damage reports that made no tactical sense. 43% of the fleet destroyed or crippled, nearly 8,000 Krell dead, and not a single human warship engaged. Not one. The humans had fought with mining ships, with cargo haulers, with atmosphere fighters that had no business operating in vacuum, with mass drivers designed to throw rocks at asteroids. They had fought with everything they had, and they had fought with a ferocity that the Krell, for all their centuries of warfare, had never encountered. Vorth composed his report to the Hegemony High Command. He chose his words carefully, knowing that they would be read not only by his superiors but by the Conclave, by the entire galaxy. He could not afford to seem weak, but he could not afford to lie either. The truth was too important. "The human species," he wrote, "does not fight according to any known tactical doctrine. They do not value their own survival above mission objectives. They do not withdraw when losses become unacceptable. They do not recognize when they are beaten. Our intelligence indicated a fragmented species, incapable of unified action. This was incorrect. When threatened, they achieve a form of unity that is not organizational but instinctual. They fight as a single organism, each component acting independently but toward a common purpose, the destruction of the threat. I cannot recommend further engagement at this time. I cannot guarantee that further engagement would result in victory. The humans are not a military power. They are something else entirely. I have no word for what they are." On Vala Prime, the Conclave received the news in stunned silence. Ambassador Lyss of the KRYL read the report 3 times, her feathered crest rising and falling with each reading. The Xylosian moderator's moist skin paled to a shade that indicated extreme distress. Even the Dorith, usually inscrutable, flickered in patterns that suggested something very close to fear. Thrax of the Krell was not present. He had been recalled to the hegemony for consultations, and rumors said he had not emerged from the high command chambers for 3 days. Some said he was being praised for his initiative. Others said he was being held responsible for the disaster. The truth, as always, was probably somewhere in between. But one thing was certain. The galaxy's comfortable assumptions about humanity had been shattered. The primitive, fragmented species from the outer verge had just handed the Krell hegemony, one of the 7 great powers, the most humiliating military defeat in its history. And they had done it without a single warship. Ambassador LYSS rose from her seat, her voice quiet, but carrying clearly through the hall of whispers. "We need to understand them," she said. "Not as a species to be managed. Not as a threat to be contained. We need to understand what they are, what drives them, what makes them capable of this. Because if we don't, we will make the same mistake the Krell made. And next time, it may not be a Krell fleet that limps home in shame. Next time, it may be all of us." The conclave sat in silence, the weight of her words settling over them like a shroud. Outside, the great wheel of the galaxy continued its slow turn, carrying them all toward a future they could no longer predict. And on Earth, in the aftermath of the battle, humans began to emerge from shelters, from bunkers, from basements where they had huddled during the brief, violent conflict. They looked up at the sky, where the wreckage of Krell ships still burned in orbit, visible even in daylight as falling stars. They held each other. They wept. They cheered. And then, with the practical efficiency that had always characterized their species, they began to clean up the mess. The dead were counted. The wounded were treated. The debris was cataloged for salvage. And somewhere in the wreckage of a Krell frigate, human scientists found technology that would take them decades to understand. Shields, weapons, FTL communications, all the wonders of a galactic civilization that had considered them too primitive to matter. They did not celebrate this windfall. They studied it, quietly, methodically, with the same patient determination that had carried them from caves to stars in less than 10,000 years. Because somewhere in the back of every human mind, a thought was forming. A dangerous thought. A thought that would have terrified the Conclave if they had known it existed. The Krell had attacked them. The Krell had tried to conquer them. The Krell had failed. And now humanity had Krell technology to study. The galaxy had just made its first mistake with humanity. It would not be the last. The aftermath of the Battle of Souls sent shockwaves through the galactic community that would take cycles to fully comprehend. On 100 worlds, in 1,000 languages, the news spread like fire through dry grass. The Krell hegemony, one of the 7 great powers, had been defeated. Not by a rival species, not by an ancient enemy, by a race of primitives who had barely achieved FDL, who had no unified government, who fought with mining ships and cargo haulers, and the burning, irrational refusal to die. The conclave of 7 species convened in emergency session for the first time in 300 cycles. The Hall of Whispers, usually so calm, so measured, now crackled with tension that even the living crystal walls could not soothe. Every seat was filled. Every ambassador was present, and every one of them was afraid. Ambassador LYSS of the KRYLL stood at the center of the holographic display, her feathered form rigid with barely contained emotion. Around her, the display showed the tactical recordings from the battle, recovered from the wreckage of Krell ships. They played on a loop, human ships flying into certain death, human pilots laughing as they died, human transmissions flooding every frequency with madness and music and the strange, terrible beauty of a species that refused to submit. "We have watched these recordings 17 times, LYSS said, her voice cutting through the murmurs of the assembled ambassadors. 17 times, and still I cannot fully comprehend what I am seeing. These are not soldiers. These are civilians, miners, truck drivers, retired pilots old enough to be great-grandparents. And yet they fought with a ferocity that would shame our finest warriors." The Xylosian moderator shifted in her seat, her moist skin glistening with anxiety. "The question before us is not what happened, but what happens now. The Krell acted without conclave authorization. They violated the spirit of our agreements, if not the letter. But they have been defeated, and defeated badly. The humans now possess Krell technology salvaged from the wreckage. They have demonstrated a capacity for violence that we did not anticipate. They are a variable we cannot control. A variable we cannot control, repeated Ambassador Thrax, who had finally emerged from the hegemony high command and returned to his seat. His voice was flat, emotionless, but his compound eyes burned with something that might have been shame or might have been rage. You speak of them as if they were a weather pattern, a natural disaster to be endured. They are not a storm, moderator. They are a species, and they have humiliated the Krell hegemony before the entire galaxy. This cannot stand. Can you defeat them? The question came from the Dorith representative, its crystalline form flickering with patterns of blunt inquiry. Your fleet was destroyed. Your technology proved inadequate. Can you defeat them now? Thrax's mandibles clicked in a gesture that translated roughly to suppressed fury. We were unprepared. We underestimated them. We will not make that mistake again. The full might of the hegemony will be met by the full might of humanity. LYSS interrupted. And what will that look like, Ambassador? More mining ships? More suicide attacks? More of whatever incomprehensible madness drove them to fight as they did. You saw the recordings. They are not afraid of death. They do not value survival the way we do. How do you defeat an enemy that does not fear annihilation? The hall fell silent. It was the question none of them wanted to ask, the thought none of them wanted to voice. How do you fight a species that treats extinction as an acceptable outcome? For 3 days, the conclave debated. The KRYLL advocated for diplomacy, for opening contact with humanity on equal terms, for attempting to understand them before it was too late. The Xylosians, ever practical, argued for quarantine, seal off the Sol system, prevent human expansion, contain the threat. The Krell demanded retribution, a second attack, overwhelming force that would leave no doubt about the hierarchy of galactic power. The other species took sides, formed alliances, broke them, reformed them. It was the most heated debate in conclave history, and it accomplished nothing. On the 4th day, a compromise emerged. It was not elegant. It was not just. But it was, in the minds of the older species, necessary. They would not attack humanity. Not yet. But they would not treat with them as equals, either. Instead, they would do something that had worked for 10,000 years of galactic diplomacy. They would demonstrate overwhelming force. They would make the humans understand, once and for all, that their victory over the Krell was a fluke, a lucky accident, and that continued defiance would mean annihilation. The combined fleet assembled at the edge of known space, near the system the humans called Barnard's Star. It was the largest military force gathered since the Unification Wars, 5,000 cycles past. Ships from every member species, representing technologies and tactics developed over millennia, converged on that single point. KRYLL battle cruisers, sleek and silent, their weapons capable of cracking planets. Xylosian dreadnoughts, massive and slow, designed for orbital bombardment. Krell warships, scarred and angry, eager for redemption. Even the Dorith contributed, though their contribution was mysterious, a single ship, crystalline and beautiful, that seemed to hum with energies the other species could not quite understand. The fleet numbered nearly 500 vessels. It stretched across light seconds of space, a city of warships waiting to deliver a message. And on the flagship of this armada, a KRYLL command vessel named Peaceful Wisdom, the ambassadors gathered to compose that message. They debated wording, tone, emphasis. Should it be threatening or measured? Should they demand unconditional surrender or offer terms? In the end, they settled on something that seemed, to their ancient sensibilities, perfectly reasonable. They would give humanity a choice. Submit to conclave authority, disarm all military capabilities, accept a period of supervised probation, say 50 cycles, long enough for the humans to mature into proper galactic citizens. In return, they would be granted protected status, access to trade, the benefits of membership in the galactic community. It was, The ambassadors agreed, more than generous. It was mercy. The message was encoded and transmitted toward Seoul. It would take several hours to arrive, even at FTL communication speeds. The fleet settled in to wait. On Earth, the message was received with the same technology humanity had salvaged from the Krell wreckage. It was translated, analyzed, and delivered to every government on the planet within minutes. And then humanity did what humanity had always done when faced with an ultimatum. They argued. The debates that followed were chaotic, passionate, and utterly human. In the temporary headquarters of what would later be called the United Earth Directorate, representatives from every nation gathered to decide their species' fate. The Americans advocated for defiance, their historical memory still fresh with the taste of independence. The Chinese counseled patience, arguing that survival required strategic thinking. The Russians, pragmatic as always, wanted to know exactly what supervised probation meant. The smaller nations, the ones who had spent centuries being trampled by larger powers, were divided. Some saw submission as the only path to survival. Others saw it as the first step toward extinction. In the streets, ordinary humans made their feelings known. Protests erupted in every major city. Some chanted for peace, for surrender, for any outcome that would spare their children. Others demanded resistance, waving flags and singing anthems and vowing to fight to the last. Families argued across dinner tables. Friends ended relationships. The weight of an entire species' future pressed down on every conversation, every decision, every moment. And through it all, a small group of scientists and engineers worked in secret in underground laboratories scattered across the planet. They had been studying the Krell wreckage since the day after the battle, and what they had found was both terrifying and hopeful. Krell technology was advanced, yes, but it was not magic. It could be understood. It could be replicated. And in some cases, it could be improved. A young engineer named Mei Lin, working in a facility hidden beneath the Gobi Desert, made the breakthrough. She had been studying the Krell FTL drive, trying to understand its principles, when she noticed something odd. The Krell design was elegant, refined over centuries, but it was also conservative. They had optimized their drive for safety, for reliability, for the long-term survival of the ship. They had never considered the possibility that someone might want to push the drive beyond its designed limits. Humans, Mei Lin reflected, had always been willing to push beyond limits. She calculated the theoretical maximum output of the drive if safety protocols were ignored. Then she calculated it again, just to be sure. Then she called her supervisor and told him, in a voice that shook only slightly, that she had found something. 3 weeks passed. The conclave fleet waited, its patience growing thin. The ambassadors sent follow-up messages, each slightly more insistent than the last. Still, humanity did not respond. Not with surrender, not with defiance, with silence. On the flagship Peaceful Wisdom, Ambassador LYSS watched the tactical displays with growing unease. The humans were doing something. She could feel it, though her instruments showed nothing but the normal activity of a primitive industrial civilization. Ships moved between planets. Communications flowed. But beneath that surface normality, there was something else, something she could not quite identify. "What are they doing?" she murmured, more to herself than to anyone else. Her tactical officer, a young KRYLL named Soren, consulted his instruments. "Ambassador, they appear to be evacuating. Population centers are emptying. Ships are moving civilians to underground facilities, to remote colonies, to the asteroid belt. It looks like they're preparing for something." "For what? Bombardment? Invasion?" "I don't know, Ambassador. But whatever it is, they're doing it with remarkable efficiency. Their coordination has improved dramatically since the battle. They've established a unified command structure. They've integrated Krell technology into their own systems. They're learning, Ambassador. Learning fast." LYSS felt a chill run through her feathers. Learning fast. That was the phrase that haunted her. In the 3 weeks since the ultimatum, the humans had done what should have taken cycles. Unified their governments, integrated alien technology, prepared for a war they could not possibly win. It was not supposed to be possible. And yet the evidence was there, on her displays, undeniable. The Krell ambassador, Thrax, pushed his way onto the bridge, his massive form filling the doorway. This waiting is intolerable. The hegemony demands action. If the humans will not respond, we must force a response. Authorize an attack. LYSS turned to face him, her ancient eyes meeting his with a calm that belied her inner turmoil. And what will that accomplish, Ambassador? Another battle? More deaths? We have not yet exhausted the diplomatic options. Diplomacy, Thrax spat. You speak of diplomacy with creatures who fought with mining ships, who sang songs while they died, who refused to surrender even when surrender was clearly the only rational choice. They are not civilized, LYSS. They are animals, and animals must be caged or killed. Before LYSS could respond, a new voice filled the bridge. It came from every speaker, every display, every communication device in the fleet. It was human, female, young, and utterly calm. This is Mei Lin, representing the United Earth Directorate. We have received your messages. We have considered your terms. We are prepared to respond. The bridge fell silent. Every eye, every sensor, every attention focused on that single voice. Our response will be transmitted in approximately 1 standard hour. During that time, we ask that you refrain from any hostile action. We also ask that you listen carefully to what we have to say. It is important that you understand. The transmission ended. The silence that followed was absolute. Thrax broke it first. A trick. They're stalling. Preparing some new madness. We should attack now before. Quiet. LYSS's voice was soft, but it carried the weight of 10,000 years of authority. We will wait. We will listen. And then we will decide. The hour passed more slowly than any hour in LYSS's long life. She spent it studying everything the Conclave knew about humanity, their history, their art, their wars, their music, their literature. It was a fragmentary picture, assembled from observation and the few transmissions they had intercepted over the years, but patterns began to emerge. A species that had risen from predators on a dangerous world, that had turned their aggression inward, fighting themselves for millennia, learning and growing and changing with each conflict, that had, in the blink of a cosmic eye, gone from caves to stars. A species that, when threatened, did not submit, did not negotiate, did not compromise. A species that fought. The hour ended. On every ship in the Conclave fleet, every display flickered to life. The image that appeared was not what they expected. It was not a military commander, not a political leader, not a stern-faced general issuing threats. It was a child, a human girl, perhaps 10 years old, with dark hair and dark eyes and a serious expression. She stood in what appeared to be a classroom, surrounded by other children, all of them watching the camera with the same solemn intensity. Behind them, a flag hung on the wall. It was not the flag of any nation. It was something new, a blue field dotted with stars, and in the center, a spiral that might have been a galaxy or might have been a seed. "Hello," the girl said. "My name is Amara. I'm 10 years old. I live in a city called Nairobi, on the continent of Africa, on the planet Earth. My teacher said I should speak first, because I'm the youngest, and because she said you need to understand that we're not just soldiers. We're not just the people who fight. We're children. We're families. We're artists and farmers and teachers and dreamers. We're human." She paused, as if gathering her thoughts, and for a moment her composure cracked, revealing the frightened child beneath. Then she straightened her shoulders and continued. "We know you're scared of us. We know you think we're crazy, because we fought your ships with mining vessels, and we didn't run away. But we're not crazy. We just love our home. We love our families. We love being alive. And when you threatened to take that away, we got angry. Not scared. Angry. That's what humans do. We get angry when something we love is in danger. And when we get angry, we fight. We fight hard. We fight dirty. We fight until we can't fight anymore." Another pause. The girl's eyes glistened, but she did not cry. "So here's what we decided. The grown-ups, I mean. They argued for a long time about what to do. Some wanted to surrender. Some wanted to fight. But in the end, they all agreed on one thing. We're not going to let you tell us what to do. We're not going to let you cage us. We're not going to let you take our home." She stepped back, and the camera pulled out to show the full classroom. Dozens of children, from every nation, every background, every color, standing together in silence. And behind them, the door opened, and a figure entered. It was the same scarred general whose image would later become legendary across the galaxy. His name was Marcus Chun, and he had lost his left eye in the first battle, fighting off a Krell boarding party with nothing but a welding torch and the fury of a man protecting his home. His face was lined, his remaining eye tired, but his voice when he spoke was steady as stone. "My name is Marcus Chun. I am a general in the United Earth Defense Force. Before the Krell attacked, I was a historian. I taught young people about wars that happened centuries ago, about the mistakes our ancestors made, about the cost of violence. I thought I understood what it meant to fight. I was wrong." He stepped forward, standing beside the children, one scarred hand resting gently on Amara's shoulder. "I learned, in the fire of that battle, that fighting is not about strategy or tactics or weapons. It's about love. It's about looking at the people beside you and knowing that you would die for them, and that they would die for you. It's about understanding that some things are worth more than survival. Some things are worth more than life itself." He looked directly into the camera, and in that moment, every being in the Conclave fleet felt as if he were looking at them alone. "You offered us a choice. Submit or be destroyed. But you don't understand. That's not a choice. Not for us. Submission is death, not of our bodies, but of everything that makes us human. Our freedom, our dignity, our right to decide our own future. Without those things, we are not human. We are just meat walking around in human-shaped skins." He paused, letting the words sink in. "So here is our answer. We will not submit. We will not disarm. We will not accept your probation. If you attack us, we will fight. We will fight with everything we have, everything we are, everything we will ever become. We will fight until our last ship is dust and our last soldier is dead. And even then, we will not stop, because we will have taught our children to fight, and they will teach their children and their children after them. We will become your nightmare, the thing that haunts your sleep for 10,000 years. We will make you regret the day you looked at our little blue world and thought you could take it from us." The children behind him stirred, and Amara spoke again, her young voice clear and strong. "But we don't want to fight. We want to live. We want to grow up and have families and build things and explore the stars. We want to meet you, not as enemies, but as friends. We want to learn from you, and maybe teach you a few things too. We want to be part of the galaxy. But we can't do that if you treat us like children who need to be controlled. We can't do that if you threaten to destroy us every time we disagree." Marcus Chin nodded, and for the first time, something like a smile touched his scarred face. "So here is our counteroffer. Withdraw your fleet. Leave our system. Go back to your worlds and think about what you've seen here. Think about a species that would rather die than surrender. Think about what that means. And then, if you're willing, come back. Not with guns. Not with ultimatums. Come back with open hands and open minds. Come back ready to meet us as equals. Because that's the only way this ends well. For all of us." The transmission ended. The displays went dark. And on the bridge of the peaceful wisdom, Ambassador LYSS sat in stunned silence, her ancient heart pounding against her ribs. Beside her, Thrax of the Krell was trembling, with rage, with fear, with something he could not name. That was, they dared, they threatened us, they... "Quiet," LYSS said again, but this time her voice was different. This time it was filled with something that sounded almost like wonder. "Did you not understand what you just witnessed?" Thrax stared at her. "I witnessed defiance, insolence, a declaration of war." "No." LYSS shook her head slowly, her feathered crest rising in awe. "You witnessed something far more rare. You witnessed a species that could have begged for mercy, that could have surrendered and survived, choosing instead to stand. Not out of stupidity, not out of madness, out of love, out of principle, out of something we KRYLL have not seen in 10,000 years." She turned to face the tactical display, where the human system glowed faintly in the darkness. "They are not primitive, Thrax. They are not dangerous because of their weapons or their ships. They are dangerous because of what they carry in their hearts. That little girl, that scarred general, those children standing together. That is what we face. That is what we must learn to understand. The fleet waited. The ambassadors debated. And on Earth, in classrooms and homes and streets across the planet, humans waited too, not in fear, but in the quiet certainty that they had done the right thing. They had spoken their truth. They had drawn their line. And whatever came next, they would face it together. As humans always had to eye in the void between stars, the combined might of the conclave fleet hung in silence. 500 warships, representing 10,000 years of galactic civilization, waited for a response from a species that had just declared, with the voice of a child and the eyes of a scarred historian, that they would rather die than submit. The silence stretched for minutes, then hours, as the ambassadors retreated to their private chambers to confer with their governments, to debate, to argue, to try to comprehend what they had just witnessed. But on Earth, the work had only begun. In a bunker buried deep beneath the Siberian permafrost, a team of engineers and artists and historians and programmers worked feverishly on a project that had no name, no precedent, no guarantee of success. They called it simply the transmission, and they had been building it since the moment the conclave ultimatum arrived. It was not a weapon. It was not a defense. It was something far more dangerous. It was the truth. General Marcus Chun stood at the center of the chaos, his one good eye moving from screen to screen, monitor to monitor, watching his people pour their hearts and souls into this final message. Beside him, Mei Lin, the young engineer whose breakthrough had given them hope, studied the data streams with the intensity of someone who understood that failure was not an option. The archive integration is complete, she reported quietly. Every major database, every historical record, every piece of art, music, literature, film, everything we could salvage from every culture on Earth. It's all here, compressed and encoded and ready to transmit. Shin nodded slowly. And the other material? Mei Lin's face tightened. That's ready too. The war footage, the atrocities, the concentration camps, the bombings, all of it. Every terrible thing we've ever done to each other. Every mistake, every horror. It's all there, right alongside the beauty. A young programmer nearby looked up, his face pale. General, are we sure about this? Showing them the worst parts of who we are? The wars, the genocides, the slavery, the everything? Won't that just confirm what they already believe about us? That we're violent savages who need to be controlled. Shin was quiet for a long moment, watching the screens flicker with images of humanity's greatest achievements and darkest moments. Then he turned to face the young man, and his voice was gentle. Son, they already think we're savages. They already think we're dangerous. Hiding the truth won't change that. But maybe, just maybe, showing them everything will help them understand. The good and the bad. The beautiful and the terrible. The love and the hate. All of it. Because that's what we are. That's what it means to be human. We're not one thing or the other. We're everything, all at once, fighting with ourselves every single day to be better than we were yesterday. He gestured to the screens, where images of children playing in sunlight faded into images of soldiers marching to war. We could show them only the good. Make ourselves look noble and peaceful and worthy of their respect. But they'd see through it eventually. They'd find the truth, and then they'd never trust us again. Or we could show them only the bad, and confirm every fear they have. But that's not the whole story either. The only chance we have, the only chance, is to show them everything. Let them see who we really are, and then let them decide. The young programmer swallowed hard, then nodded. Yes, sir. I understand. Good. Shin clapped him on the shoulder. Now get back to work. We've got a message to send. On the bridge of the peaceful wisdom, Ambassador LYSS watched the chronometer tick toward the appointed hour with growing unease. The humans had promised a response. They had asked for 1 hour. That hour had come and gone, and still there was nothing but silence from the Sol system. Perhaps they've changed their minds, Thrax suggested, his voice heavy with barely concealed satisfaction. Perhaps they finally realized the folly of defying the conclave. We should move now before. No. LYSS's voice was firm. We gave our word. We wait. The Krell ambassador's mandibles clicked in frustration, but he said nothing. The KRYLL were the oldest of the seven, and their word carried weight. Even the Krell, for all their bluster, knew better than to openly defy a KRYLL ambassador. The minutes crawled past. The fleet waited. And then, precisely at the moment when the humans had said they would speak, every communication device in every ship flared to life. But this was different from before. This was not a simple transmission, not a single voice or image. This was a flood, a torrent, a deluge of data that overwhelmed every receiver, every translator, every system designed to process information. For a terrifying moment, the Conclave fleet went blind, their sensors blinded by the sheer volume of incoming data, their communication systems choked beyond capacity, their computers struggling to parse a transmission that seemed to have no end. And then, as suddenly as it began, the data flood ceased. In its place, a single image appeared on every screen, in every language, on every ship. It was a planet, Earth, seen from space, blue and white and beautiful, hanging in the void like a jewel. But it was not a photograph. It was something else, a composite, a mosaic made of millions of smaller images, each one a human face. Young and old, every color, every expression, every emotion. They filled the planet like cells in a living organism, and as the Conclave watched, the faces began to move. The transmission had begun. What followed was unlike anything the galaxy had ever witnessed. It was not a speech. It was not a negotiation. It was not a threat or a plea or a declaration of war. It was a story. The story of humanity, told in images and sounds and words and music, spanning 10,000 years of history compressed into a single, overwhelming moment. The Conclave saw humanity's beginning. Small tribes huddled around fires on the African savanna, painting animals on cave walls, burying their dead with flowers. They saw the first cities rise, saw humans invent writing and mathematics and law. They saw empires expand and contract, saw wars fought with bronze and iron and steel, saw kings and queens and prophets and poets shape the destiny of their species. They saw the dark times too. The transmission did not flinch from them. They saw the concentration camps, the mass graves, the bombing of cities, the faces of children starving during famines caused by human cruelty. They saw slavery and genocide and torture and every other horror that humans had inflicted on humans. They saw it all, and they understood that this species, this strange and terrible species, had looked into the abyss of its own darkness and somehow, impossibly, chosen to keep going. But then the transmission showed them the other side. The moments of grace, the acts of impossible kindness, the soldiers who threw themselves on grenades to save their comrades, the doctors who stayed in plague cities to tend the dying, the strangers who risked everything to help other strangers, the lovers who held each other through wars and famines and disasters, the parents who worked themselves to death so their children could have a better life. They saw human art, the Sistine Chapel, the Taj Mahal, the great cathedrals of Europe, the temples of Asia, the mosques of the Middle East. They heard human music, Beethoven and the Beatles, Mozart and Miles Davis, folk songs from every culture, anthems from every nation. They read human poetry, Rumi and Shakespeare, Neruda and Dickinson, words that spoke of love and loss and hope and despair with a beauty that transcended translation. They saw human science, the first wheel, the first fire, the first medicine. They saw humans learn to fly, to cure diseases, to split the atom, to reach for the stars. They saw the moment when a human first stepped onto another world, and they heard the words he spoke. That's one small step for a man, one giant leap for mankind. And through it all, woven through every image, every sound, every moment, was a single, recurring theme. Connection. The fierce, unbreakable bonds that humans formed with each other. Parents and children, lovers and friends, communities and nations, strangers who became family in moments of crisis, enemies who became friends when they learned to see each other's humanity. On the bridge of the peaceful wisdom, Ambassador LYSS sat motionless, tears streaming down her feathered face. She had lived 10,000 years. She had seen empires rise and fall, watched species come and go, witnessed wonders and horrors beyond counting. But she had never seen anything like this. Never seen a species so brutally honest about its own flaws, so fiercely proud of its own achievements, so desperately hopeful about its own future. Beside her, Thrax of the Krell was silent. His compound eyes, usually so hard and cold, reflected the images on the screen with an expression that might have been wonder or might have been fear. He saw his own species in these humans, the aggression, the ambition, the willingness to fight. But he saw something else too. Something the Krell had lost long ago, if they had ever possessed it at all. Vulnerability. The willingness to be hurt, to be wrong, to be weak, and to keep going anyway. The transmission continued. It showed humanity's greatest failures and their greatest triumphs, often side by side. The same species that had built Auschwitz had also built hospitals that saved millions. The same species that had dropped atomic bombs had also signed treaties to ban them. The same species that had fought wars over skin color and religion had also marched and died for equality and freedom. It was confusing. It was contradictory. It made no sense by any logical measure. And yet, as the transmission reached its final moments, the conclave began to understand that this contradiction was not a flaw. It was the point. Humanity was not a species that had achieved perfection. They were a species that, despite every imperfection, every failure, every horror, kept trying, kept hoping, kept believing that tomorrow could be better than today. The final images flashed across the screens. A child laughing, a soldier weeping, a mother holding her newborn, an old man holding his dying wife's hand, a city rebuilt after a war, a forest regrown after a fire, a species looking up at the stars, wondering what was out there. And then, silence. The transmission ended. The screens went dark. And in the void between stars, 500 warships hung motionless, their crews stunned into silence by what they had witnessed. On the bridge of the peaceful wisdom, no one spoke. No one moved. The ambassadors stared at the dark screens as if expecting more, as if hoping for more, as if unable to accept that it was over. Finally, Ambassador LYSS rose from her seat. Her ancient legs trembled beneath her, and she leaned heavily on her staff as she made her way to the center of the bridge. When she spoke, her voice was soft, barely more than a whisper, but it carried to every corner of the silent room. We have been fools. Thrax looked up, his mandibles working silently. For once, he had no argument, no retort, no challenge. We have been fools, LYSS repeated, to think that we could judge them, to think that we could threaten them, to think that we could cage them. They are not primitive. They are not dangerous in the way we thought. They are something far more terrifying and far more beautiful than anything we have ever encountered. She gestured to the dark screens, where the echoes of humanity's story still seemed to linger. They have looked into the darkest depths of their own souls and chosen to keep going. They have committed atrocities beyond imagining and then turned around and committed acts of love beyond measure. They have fought each other for millennia and still found ways to forgive, to rebuild, to hope. They are chaos and order, destruction and creation, hate and love, all wrapped in fragile bodies that live 100 years if they are lucky. Her voice grew stronger, filled with an emotion she had not felt in millennia, wonder. And in those 100 years, they accomplish more than some species accomplish in 1,000. They love more fiercely. They fight more desperately. They create more beautifully. They dream more wildly. They are, in every possible way, more alive than we have been in 10,000 years. On the tactical display, the Sol system glowed peacefully, unaware of the impact its children had just made on the galaxy. The question before us, LYSS continued, is not whether we can defeat them. We cannot. Not because we lack the weapons, but because we lack the will. They would fight us to the last breath, and then their children would fight us, and their children's children, until we either destroyed them completely or gave up in exhaustion. And if we destroyed them completely, we would have destroyed something irreplaceable, something the galaxy needs. She turned to face the other ambassadors, her ancient eyes burning with new fire. I propose a new course. Not war. Not containment. Not probation. Recognition. We recognize humanity for what they are, not a species to be managed, but a species to be welcomed. We open diplomatic relations. We offer trade, knowledge, friendship. We treat them as equals, because that is what they have proven themselves to be. And we watch, and we learn, and we hope that some of their fire, some of their passion, some of their desperate love for life might kindle something in us that has grown cold. The ambassadors exchanged glances. The Xylosian moderator's moist skin rippled with uncertainty. The Dorith representative flickered in patterns of cautious agreement. Even the Krell, represented now by a subordinate officer in Thrax's stunned silence, offered no objection. Thrax himself stood slowly, his massive form somehow diminished. When he spoke, his voice was rough, stripped of its usual arrogance. I have led my people into disaster. I have cost them ships and lives and honor. And now I have seen what we could have been if we had not let our aggression consume our humanity. If we still had any humanity left. He looked at LYSS, and for the first time, there was no hostility in his compound eyes. Only exhaustion. Only grief. The Krell will not oppose this course. We have done enough damage. LYSS nodded slowly, accepting his surrender not as a victory, but as a beginning. Then it is decided. We will go to them, not as conquerors, not as judges, as guests, as friends, as fellow travelers on this long journey through the dark. She turned to her tactical officer, who still sat at his station, staring at nothing. Soren, open a channel. Prepare to transmit. To whom, Ambassador? LYSS smiled, a rare expression for a KRYLL, but one that transformed her ancient face into something almost youthful. To Earth. To the humans. Tell them we are coming. Tell them we come in peace. And tell them thank you. For showing us what we had forgotten. For reminding us what it means to be alive. On Earth, in the bunker beneath the Siberian permafrost, General Marcus Chun watched the incoming transmission with an expression that was part relief, part wonder, part hope. Well, he said quietly, turning to Mei Lin. I think it worked. Mei Lin stared at the screen, where the words of Ambassador LYSS were being translated into every human language. I think it did too. But General, what happens now? I mean, after all of this, after everything we showed them, what happens now? Chen was quiet for a long moment, watching the faces of his team as they absorbed the news, as they began to understand that the nightmare might finally be over. I don't know, he admitted. I honestly don't know. But whatever happens, we'll face it together. That's what we do. That's who we are. He looked up at the screen, at the image of the Conclave fleet beginning its slow, peaceful approach towards Seoul. And maybe, just maybe, we'll teach them a few things along the way. About being human. About being alive. About fighting for what matters, and loving what we have, and never, ever giving up. Outside, in the cold Siberian night, the stars seemed to shine a little brighter. And somewhere in the darkness between worlds, 500 warships carried the first ambassadors of a galactic civilization toward a little blue planet that had just changed everything. The approach was slow, deliberate, careful in a way that no military fleet in galactic history had ever approached a potential adversary. The 500 ships of the Conclave Armada reduced their velocity to a crawl, their weapons systems powered down, their shields lowered, their communication arrays open on every frequency. It was not a tactical decision. It was a gesture, an offering, a way of saying, without words, that they came not as conquerors but as guests. On the bridge of the peaceful wisdom, Ambassador LYSS watched the blue marble grow larger on the view screen with an emotion she had not felt in millennia. Nervousness. 10,000 years of diplomatic experience, countless first contacts with countless species, and here she was, her ancient heart fluttering like a fledgling's, as they approached the most remarkable world she had ever encountered. The humans are responding to our approach, Soren reported, his voice carefully neutral. They've opened a designated approach corridor. They're guiding us toward a facility they call Orbital Station Hope. It appears to be a combined scientific outpost and diplomatic center, constructed primarily from salvaged Krell technology. Thrax, standing silently in the corner of the bridge, shifted uncomfortably at the mention of Krell salvage. But he said nothing. He had said very little since the transmission ended, spending most of his time in his quarters, reviewing the human data over and over, trying to understand, trying to comprehend how his species had been so wrong. Transmit our thanks, LYSS ordered. Confirm that we will follow their guidance precisely. And Soren, notify the fleet that I will be leading the first contact team personally. I want no mistakes, no misunderstandings, no actions that could be interpreted as hostile. Understood, Ambassador. The approach took 3 hours. 3 hours during which the Conclave fleet drifted slowly through the Sol system, past Mars with its scars of ancient battle and recent construction, past the asteroid belt where human miners still worked their claims, past the moon where the first human footsteps still lay undisturbed in the gray dust. And all the while, the humans watched. Not with weapons, though they had them. Not with suspicion, though they had reason. They watched with the same fierce, curious attention that had driven them to explore every corner of their own world and reach for the stars beyond. Station Hope was not beautiful. It was functional, utilitarian, built in haste from salvaged materials and human ingenuity. But as the peaceful wisdom drew alongside it, matching velocity with the slow rotation that provided artificial gravity, LYSS found herself moved by its very ugliness. This was not a monument to power or wealth. This was proof of survival. Proof that a species, faced with annihilation, had chosen to build rather than despair. The airlock cycled open, and Ambassador LYSS stepped onto human territory for the first time. The delegation that greeted her was small. No military escort. No ceremonial guards. Just 5 humans, standing in a simple circle. Their faces a mixture of hope and caution, and the same nervousness that LYSS herself felt. In the center stood General Marcus Chun, his scarred face solemn, his one good "I'm meeting" hers without flinching. Ambassador LYSS, he said, his voice carrying clearly through the translation devices embedded in her suit. Welcome to Earth. We're honored by your presence. LYSS inclined her head in the KRYLL gesture of respect. General Chun, the honor is mine. I have watched your transmission many times since you sent it. I do not think I will ever fully comprehend it, but I am beginning to understand. Chun smiled, that strange human expression that crinkled the eyes and softened the face. To be honest, Ambassador, we don't fully comprehend it either. We're still figuring ourselves out. Probably always will be. That's kind of our thing. Behind him, the other humans relaxed slightly, their tension easing at the general's casual tone. LYSS noted this with interest, the way human emotions shifted in response to leadership, to connection, to the simple act of being together. It was so different from KRYLL formality, from the rigid protocols that governed her species' interactions. May I introduce my companions? Chun continued, gesturing to the others. This is Mei Lin, our chief engineer. Without her, we wouldn't have been able to send the transmission at all. She figured out how to adapt your technology to our needs. Mei Lin stepped forward, her young face serious but her eyes bright. Ambassador, we have so many questions. About your technology, your culture, your science. I hope we'll have time to learn from each other. You will, LYSS promised. I give you my word. The introductions continued. A scientist named Dr. Kenji Tanaka, whose grandfather had died in the first suicide run against the Krell fleet. A teacher named Maria Santos, who had helped prepare the children for the transmission. And a young man named David Okonkwo, barely out of his teens, who had been one of the pilots in the battle, flying his atmospheric fighter against ships 100 times its size. When David stepped forward, LYSS felt her breath catch. He was so young, so impossibly young, and yet his eyes held the same fire she had seen in the transmission, the same fierce determination to protect what he loved. I wanted to meet you, David said quietly. I wanted to look you in the eye and tell you. I don't hate you. Any of you. Even the Krell. I fought them. I watched friends die. But I don't hate them. Because if I hated them, I'd be no better than what they thought we were. And we're better than that. We have to be. LYSS found herself reaching out, her feathered hand extending toward the young human. It was a breach of protocol, a gesture of extraordinary intimacy for a KRYLL. But David took her hand without hesitation, his warm flesh meeting her cool feathers, and in that moment, something passed between them. Understanding. Connection. The beginning of trust. Behind LYSS, in the airlock, Thrax watched with eyes that saw everything. The days that followed were unlike anything in galactic history. The Conclave delegation spread across Earth, visiting cities and villages, meeting humans from every walk of life. They watched children play in schools and farmers tend their fields and artists create works of breathtaking beauty. They sat in homes and shared meals, learning to eat human food, learning to laugh at human jokes, learning to cry at human sorrows. And everywhere they went, they saw the same thing. Resilience. Hope. The stubborn refusal to give up, even when giving up would have been easier. On the third day, Thrax requested a private meeting with General Chun. They met in a small room in Station Hope, with no attendants, no translators except the devices they wore, no witnesses to what passed between them. For a long moment, the Krell ambassador simply looked at the human general. Then, slowly, with movements that spoke of enormous effort, he lowered himself to his knees. It was the Krell gesture of ultimate submission, reserved for moments of profound shame and supplication. "Get up," Chin said quietly. "Please, get up." Thrax remained where he was. "I cannot. Not until you understand. Not until you know what I have done. I know what you did. You attacked us. You tried to conquer us. You killed my people." Chin's voice was steady, but there was pain beneath it. "I know. And yet you welcome me here. You offer me food and shelter and conversation as if I were a friend. What?" Chin was quiet for a moment, considering the question. Then he moved forward, lowering himself to the floor until he was at Thrax's level, looking into the Krell's compound eyes from inches away. "Because if I treated you the way you deserve to be treated, I'd be no better than you were. And that's not who we are. That's not what we're trying to become. We've spent our whole history fighting each other, hurting each other, destroying each other. And we've finally started to learn that the only way out of that cycle is to stop, to forgive, to try again." He reached out, placing his hand on Thrax's massive shoulder. "I'm not saying I forgive you. Not yet. That's going to take time. But I'm willing to try. I'm willing to see if we can build something better than what came before. Are you?" Thrax's massive frame shuddered. When he spoke, his voice was broken in ways that had nothing to do with translation. "I have led my people into darkness. I have cost them their honor, their ships, their children. I have no right to ask for forgiveness. But I will spend the rest of my existence trying to earn it. I will learn from you. I will change. I will become something worthy of the gift you have offered." Chin helped him to his feet, a slow, awkward process that left them both breathless. And then, for the first time since the battle, Thrax did something that would have been unthinkable just days before. He smiled. Or tried to. The Krell version of a smile was terrifying by human standards, a baring of fangs, a stretching of mandibles, but Chin understood the intent. He smiled back, and in that moment, two species that should have been enemies forever took the first step toward something else. On the 30th day of the Conclave's visit, Ambassador LYSS requested permission to address the people of Earth directly. The transmission was carried on every network, every device, every screen across the planet. Billions of humans stopped what they were doing to listen. She stood before a simple backdrop, the flag that the children had stood beneath in the original transmission, the blue field with its spiral of stars. Her ancient face was solemn, her voice steady, but there was something new in her eyes. Something that looked almost like hope. "People of Earth," she began, "I have been alive for 10,000 of your years. I have watched civilizations rise and fall. I have seen wonders beyond counting and horrors beyond imagining. And I have never, in all that time, encountered anything like you." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "When we first learned of your existence, we dismissed you. You were primitive, fragmented, chaotic. You had achieved much in a short time, but you had also made every mistake a species can make. We thought you needed to be managed, controlled, taught your place in the galactic order. Her voice hardened. We were wrong. Terribly, catastrophically wrong. You are not primitive. You are not chaotic in the way we thought. You are something far more complex, far more beautiful, far more terrifying than we could have imagined. You are a species that has stared into the abyss of its own darkness and chosen, again and again, to reach for the light. She looked directly into the camera, speaking to every human who watched. You have taught us something in these 30 days. You have taught us that strength is not the ability to destroy. It is the ability to create, to love, to forgive, to hope. You have taught us that unity is not the absence of difference, but the celebration of it. You have taught us that life is not about surviving, but about living fully, passionately, desperately, in the brief time we are given. Her voice softened, and for the first time, the galaxy saw Kryll weep. I am old. I have seen too much, lost too much, forgotten too much. But you have reminded me of what it means to be young, what it means to be alive, what it means to hope for tomorrow, even when today is dark. She spread her arms wide, a gesture of openness that transcended species. On behalf of the conclave of 7 species, I offer you this: friendship, partnership, a place among the stars as equals, as teachers, as friends. We have much to learn from you, and perhaps, in time, you will find that you have something to learn from us as well. But whatever comes, know this: you are no longer alone. You are part of something larger. You are part of the family of worlds. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried to every corner of Earth. Thank you. Thank you for being human. Thank you for reminding us what that means. The transmission ended, and across Earth, billions of humans sat in silence, processing what they had heard, what it meant, what would come next. In a small village in Kenya, an old woman held her granddaughter close and whispered, "We did it. We really did it." In a crowded square in Beijing, strangers embraced, laughing and crying at the same time. In a hospital in Rio de Janeiro, a dying man asked for the window to be opened so he could see the sky one last time, and his family gathered around him, holding hands, watching the stars. And in a small room on Station Hope, General Marcus Chun sat with Ambassador Lyss and Ambassador Thrax, the 3 of them sharing a simple meal, talking about nothing and everything, building the foundations of a friendship that would shape the galaxy for millennia to come. The months that followed were a blur of activity: diplomatic missions, cultural exchanges, scientific collaborations. Human engineers learned from Kryll scientists. Kryll artists studied human music. Krell warriors, to their own surprise, found themselves drawn to human literature, to the stories of conflict and redemption that spoke to something deep in their warriors' souls. Trade routes opened. Embassies were established. Humans began to spread through the galaxy, not as conquerors or refugees, but as explorers, as students, as teachers, as friends. They brought with them their art and music, their food and fashion, their endless curiosity, and their stubborn refusal to accept the way things were. And everywhere they went, they left their mark, not in destruction, but in creation, not in conquest, but in connection. On a distant world, a human musician taught a Xylosian child to play the guitar. On a Kryll warship, now converted to peaceful purposes, a human engineer helped redesign the engines to be more efficient. On a Dorith crystal world, a human poet sat for hours, watching the light play through the crystalline structures, trying to find words for beauty that transcended language. The galaxy was changing, and at the heart of that change was a little blue planet, spinning quietly in the outer verge, home to a species that had looked annihilation in the face and chosen hope instead. Years passed. Decades. The humans who had fought in the Battle of Seoul grew old and died, their places taken by new generations who had never known a galaxy without contact, without connection, without the warmth of other worlds reaching out in friendship. But they never forgot. The story was told and retold, around fires and in classrooms, in songs, and in books, in every language humans had ever spoken. The story of how a primitive species, faced with the might of the galaxy, had refused to bow, how they had shown their worst selves and their best selves, and how that honesty had changed everything. And in the telling, the story itself became a kind of scripture, a reminder of who they were and what they stood for. Not conquerors, not victims, just humans, flawed and beautiful and stubborn and hopeful, reaching for the stars with hands that had built cities and plowed fields and held each other through every darkness. On the 100th anniversary of the Battle of Seoul, a ceremony was held on Station Hope. Representatives from every species in the conclave gathered to honor the dead, to celebrate the living, to look toward the future. And at the center of the ceremony stood a young woman named Amara, the same Amara who had spoken first in the transmission, now grown old, her hair gray, her face lined with a century of living. She spoke quietly, her voice carrying through the silence. I was 10 years old when they came, when we sent our message. I remember being so scared, so small, so certain that we were all going to die. But my teacher told me something that day. She said, Amara, being scared doesn't mean you're weak. It means you're human. And being human means you keep going anyway. She smiled, her old eyes bright with memory. We kept going. We're still going. And now, 100 years later, look at what we've become. Not perfect, never perfect, but better. Always trying to be better, always reaching for the light. She looked up at the stars beyond the station's viewport, at the ships from 100 worlds gathered in celebration. They asked us once what it meant to be human. I think we're still figuring out the answer. But if I had to give one, I'd say this. Being human means never giving up. It means loving fiercely, fighting when you must, forgiving when you can, and always hoping for tomorrow. It means looking at the darkness and choosing to be the light. She turned to face the gathered crowd, human and alien alike, and raised her voice. So here's to the next 100 years. Here's to the next 1,000, the next million. Here's to the journey, together, through the dark. Here's to being human. The crowd erupted in cheers that crossed every boundary, every species, every language. And in that moment, on that small station orbiting a little blue planet, something beautiful happened. The galaxy understood. Not just humanity, not just their strength or their courage or their stubborn refusal to die. The galaxy understood what it meant to be alive, to be connected, to be part of something larger than oneself. The galaxy understood hope. And for the first time in 10,000 years, the great wheel of stars turned not toward darkness, but toward light. In the years that followed, humans spread throughout the galaxy, carrying with them their music and their art, their flaws and their dreams. They made friends of former enemies, built bridges across ancient divides, and reminded every species they met of something too easily forgotten in the long march of civilization. That life is precious, that love is possible, that hope is always worth fighting for. The Krell, transformed by their encounter with humanity, became the galaxy's most passionate advocates for peace, their warrior spirit redirected toward protection rather than conquest. The KRYLL, rejuvenated by human passion, rediscovered the joy of creation, producing art and music that rivaled humanity's own. The other species of the conclave, each in their own way, found themselves changed by contact with the strange, fierce, beautiful creatures from the little blue planet. And on Earth, life went on. Children were born and grew old. Cities rose and fell. Wars were fought, and peace was made. Through it all, humanity remained what it had always been, a contradiction, a paradox, a miracle, flawed and glorious, terrible and wonderful, desperately, passionately, irreducibly alive. Because that is what it means to be human. To fight when you must, and forgive when you can. To love without reservation, and grieve without shame. To look at the vast, cold universe and say, with every fiber of your being, I am here. I matter. I will not go quietly into that good night. To be, in the end, not the strongest or the wisest or the most advanced, but simply the most human. And for the first time, the galaxy truly understood what it meant to be human.